They say some men carry their secrets to the grave. Willie Nelson nearly did. For 92 years, he kept his silence. Through decades of tours, tragedies, and tributes. Through presidential inaugurations and funerals. Through wars, reckonings, revolutions. And then, one Sunday night, something broke. Something so raw, so final, that it forced one of the most enduring voices in American music to step out of the haze and speak. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Not in a press release, not on stage, but in a whisper. The kind that makes your skin crawl. The kind that doesn't need to shout to shake a nation. And the man he spoke about? Rob Reiner. Yes, that Rob Reiner. The beloved director. The actor. The activist. The man who brought us Stand By Me, The Princess Bride, A Few Good Men. The very image of Hollywood legacy. Progressive, thoughtful, deeply woven into American culture. The kind of figure you'd never think twice about trusting. Until now. Because on January 14th, 2026, Rob Reiner and his wife Michelle were found dead inside their $13.5 million Brentwood estate. Stabbed. The scene, according to preliminary reports, was one of unusual personal rage. The kind of rage you don't associate with robbery or strangers. No forced entry. No valuables missing. Just the Reiners. Gone. Their son, Nick Reiner, was arrested that same night, charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. But as investigators would later admit, something didn't sit right. Their daughter, Romy, 27, was the one who found them. She reportedly told LAPD, "There's someone else you need to look at. Someone dangerous. And they're still close." That's where this story begins to twist. And where Willie Nelson, of all people, enters the frame. Now let's be honest. The name Willie Nelson doesn't show up often in crime stories. The man's music is about heartbreak, freedom, wide roads, and quiet exits. He's the old outlaw, the American elder. He doesn't do drama. He doesn't do gossip. And he sure as hell doesn't go on record about Hollywood murders. But within 48 hours of the Reiner homicides, Nelson's longtime representative released a quiet, understated statement to one journalist in Austin, Texas. The kind of message that was easy to miss. Until you read the words twice. I kept quiet about Rob for years. Maybe too long. But what I saw, what I know, people deserve to hear it now. Rob Reiner was not the man you think he was. That was it. No elaboration. No follow-up. Just that. A thin crack in a myth that had taken decades to build. A crack, it turns out, that was already spreading. Because the truth about Rob Reiner, the one only a handful of insiders like Willie Nelson ever glimpsed, wasn't just about him. It wasn't about his films, his awards, or his Twitter tirades. It was about power. Quiet, smothering, generational power. The kind that doesn't scream at you. The kind that wraps you in praise, handshakes, and smiles, until you realize you can't breathe. So here's the question that no one's dared to ask out loud. What did Willie see? And why did he wait until now to speak? Because if you believe the rumors floating through back channels in Los Angeles, this wasn't just a case of a troubled son lashing out. This wasn't a domestic tragedy in a gated home. This was a reckoning, years in the making. And it wasn't just about blood. It was about buried truths, sealed documents, and a legacy that was built, not on honesty, but on omission. Now, you might be asking, what's the connection between a 92-year-old country singer and a Hollywood powerhouse? The truth is, they were closer than anyone knew. Friends, yes, but not equals. Willie Nelson and Rob Reiner had a history. Long, complicated, loaded with contradictions. Political allies on paper. Personal rivals behind closed doors. There were whispers for years that something had soured between them. A distance. A falling out. But no one pressed. No one wanted to know. Because to question Rob Reiner was to question too much. And to question Willie? Well, he never gave you the chance. Until now. But before we go any further, let's make something very clear. This isn't about dragging the dead through the mud. This is about asking what was really happening inside one of America's most perfect celebrity families, and why someone who lived thousands of miles away, who'd long stepped back from public fights, felt compelled to speak at all. And what makes this more unsettling is how carefully timed it all feels. How the silence broke just after the murders. How certain sealed estate documents were quietly handed over to authorities within 72 hours. And how, allegedly, those documents didn't just name Reiner family members, but powerful people still working in entertainment, law, and politics today. See, we've been told this is a simple story, a tragedy involving a mentally unstable son. But what if that's not the whole picture? What if that's just the frame? What if behind the press statements and court dates, there's something else? A secret only Willie and a few others ever dared to speak of, and now can no longer afford to keep buried? Think about it. Why would a man who outlived most of his friends, who spent his life avoiding scandals, risk his legacy now? He didn't need to, but he did. And according to a source close to Nelson, he had been sitting on something heavy for decades. Something tied not just to Reiner, but to a particular night in Malibu. A party, an argument, a decision that led to Willie walking out of a gathering he'd flown across the country to attend and never speaking to Rob again. Now, none of this was ever reported. Not then, not later. And if you're wondering why, you're not alone. Because here's where it gets even murkier. That same source claims Willie received an anonymous letter the day after the murders. A letter written in handwriting he recognized. A letter that referenced the very night he walked away from Rob's home. And then, hours later, he broke his silence. We don't know what was in that letter. We may never know. But what we do know is this. In the final days of Rob Reiner's life, he was making calls. Quiet ones. To people he hadn't spoken to in years. Some of them refused to call back. Willie Nelson was one of them. And now, in the wake of blood and silence, he has said just enough to turn the tide. And maybe that's the real story here. Not just who died, but who spoke and why. And before this hour is over, you'll see why those few whispered words from America's most trusted outlaw may be the key to unraveling everything we thought we knew about the Reiner family and about what power does when it's scared. Because the bodies were found in Brentwood. But the rot? The rot started somewhere else. Somewhere older, quieter, and far more dangerous. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The screams were heard at 2:13 a.m. Not loud. Not panicked. Just sharp. Focused. Like someone trying to scream through someone else's silence. Police logs later described the initial 911 call as nonverbal but distressed. That's the kind of phrase that means everything and nothing. A panic without words. A sound without context. But it wasn't the scream that would haunt the neighbors. It was what followed. Nothing. No footsteps. No sirens, at least not yet. Just the hum of Brentwood, where billion-dollar walls do their job well. Where silence isn't just accepted, it's expected. And yet inside the Reiner estate, everything was unraveling. See, this wasn't just any house. It wasn't just any family. The Reiners weren't newcomers to this neighborhood. They were the neighborhood. Cornerstone residents. Hollywood royalty. The kind of couple who hosted governors and Grammy winners, who had their caterers on speed dial and a tennis court no one ever actually used. Michelle and Rob had built their world on the careful balance of exposure and retreat. Always visible, rarely reachable. Until January 14th. Until their daughter found them. Let's pause there for a second. Because before we get into the crime scene, the motive, the family dynamics, ask yourself this. Why was Romy Reiner, their 27-year-old daughter, the one who found them? Not the house staff. Not security. Not a wellness check. Her. Alone. Now, the official report says she came over after being unable to reach her parents by phone. But there's a line buried deeper in the report, easy to miss. Romy had tried calling her father 7 times in the span of 18 minutes. 7. That's not a casual check-in. That's not, oh, I'll swing by and say hi. That's urgency. Why? And why didn't anyone else answer? Let's walk through what we do know. Romy arrived at the Brentwood estate around 2:41 a.m. She used her own key to enter through the side gate, reportedly bypassing the main entrance, which was latched but unlocked. The house was dark. Not dim, dark. As in, lights off, curtains drawn, even motion sensors disabled. For a couple known to keep their home lit like a soft jazz club well into the night, that alone was odd. She walked through the living room. Everything in place. No broken glass. No signs of a break-in. No blood, yet. It wasn't until she reached the hallway leading toward the private den that she saw the first sign. A slipper. One. Just one. Michelle's, according to the later police description, lying sideways in the middle of the carpet like it had been kicked off mid-step. Next to it, a thin trail, not a pool, a trail, dried, rust brown against the white flooring. And then came the door. Rob's study. Closed. Locked. That was rare. Very rare. And according to Romy, when she knocked, she heard a sound she couldn't place. A metallic shuffle, she called it. Like a drawer. Or a blade. By the time she forced the door open, using a decorative sculpture to break the lock, the scene she found inside would change her life forever. Let me be careful here. There are details in the coroner's report that I won't repeat. Not because I want to shield anyone, but because there's a difference between reporting a crime and exploiting it. What we can say is this. Both Rob and Michelle were found seated. Not lying down. Not in a struggle. Seated. And both had been stabbed multiple times. Each wound clean, deliberate, clustered around the chest and upper abdomen. Not chaotic. Not frantic. Intentional. Michelle's left hand was resting on Rob's right wrist. The coroner's office would later call it a staged symmetry. Whatever that means. But the most haunting part? No signs of restraint. No signs of defense wounds. Almost as if they knew the person. Or worse, expected them. Which brings us to the guest house. Now, if you've ever seen aerial photos of the Reiner property, you'll know that the guest house wasn't exactly a guest house. It was a 1,200 square foot modern box tucked behind a walled garden. Almost fully self-sufficient. It had its own entrance, kitchen, and security system. Soundproofing, too. And it's where Nick Reiner, their 32-year-old son, had been living for nearly 5 years. Why? That's where the picture starts to blur. Officially, it was temporary. Just a phase, a pause, a transitional period. But unofficially, people close to the family say Nick had become untethered from the outside world. Withdrawn. Paranoid. Erratic. He had a history, one that was both public and carefully managed. Addiction. Rehab. Recovery. A few indie screenplays that flirted with success, then vanished. A podcast that never launched. A book that almost got picked up. Almost. But by 2024, Nick had become a quiet figure. Unseen, unheard. And then, suddenly, he wasn't. When Romy called 911 from the main house, dispatch records show she made a second call 3 minutes later. This time, her voice was clear. She reportedly said, "My brother. You need to check my brother. Please. He's dangerous. He should be a suspect." Her exact wording is redacted from the public release. But the implication isn't. She named him. Before the police even arrived, she named him. Think about that. She'd just found her parents dead. She was alone in a house filled with blood, shadows, and silence. And the first thing she told police wasn't "help me." It was "check my brother." Now, that's a statement loaded with history. Because in that moment, Romy wasn't just reacting. She was revealing a pattern, a fear she'd lived with. And maybe, finally, a truth she couldn't carry alone anymore. But the weirdest part? When police made their way to the guest house, Nick was already outside, standing barefoot on the lawn, shirtless, calm, holding a coffee mug. They said he didn't run, didn't speak, just nodded when they called his name. When they asked if he'd heard anything, he allegedly replied, "I heard someone fall, as if what had just occurred inside the house was a trip, a stumble, a noise, not a crime. But here's where it gets even stranger. Police didn't find blood on him, not on his hands, not on his body, not on his clothes inside. No defensive wounds, no fresh cuts. Now sure, there are ways to clean up, ways to sterilize, but fast, thoroughly, within 28 minutes? It doesn't add up. And more than one investigator has quietly said the same thing. If he did it, he had help. If he didn't, then we're missing someone. So where does that leave us? With more questions than answers. Questions like, why were the security cameras down that night? Why did Rob Reiner make 3 calls to the same blocked number in the hours before his death? Why did Michelle reportedly burn a collection of old photos just days earlier? And why did Willie Nelson, who hadn't spoken to Rob in nearly a decade, issue a cryptic statement the very next day? We're not going to answer those yet. Not here. Because to understand what happened in that house, to really understand it, you have to go back. Not just to Nick's past, or Romy's warnings, but to the man at the center of it all. The man everyone thought they knew. Rob Reiner. And he's not who you think he is. They always say the house remembers. Not in some poetic, mystical way. I mean literally. Walls keep echoes. Floors hold weight. Doors remember how they were closed. Hard or careful, angry or afraid. And the Reiner house? That house had been holding its breath for years. Here's the part most early reports skipped over. When detectives began their preliminary walkthrough. Not the crime scene unit yet, just the first responding officers. One of them noted something that didn't fit the narrative forming in real time. The thermostat. It was set to 62 degrees. In mid-January, in Los Angeles, in a house where Michelle Reiner was known to keep it warm, almost aggressively so. Friends joked about it. Staff complained about it. It was one of those oddly specific details people remember because it never changes.